The pristine halls of the Galactic Council Station hummed with the quiet efficiency that had governed the known galaxy for over 2,000 years. Ambassador Zephyr 97 of the Altarian Collective adjusted her crystalline breathing apparatus as she reviewed the daily reports from the Outer Rim territories. The morning briefing scrolled across her neural interface in perfectly organized data streams, each piece of information categorized and prioritized according to protocols established by civilizations far older and wiser than most species could imagine. Suspended in the void between 3 star systems, the massive space station housed representatives from 47 different species, each more advanced than the last. The ethereal communion floated in their gaseous containment fields, their thoughts rippling through the chamber like visible music. The crystalline hegemony stood motionless in their designated areas, their silicon-based forms reflecting the soft blue light that emanated from the central holographic display. Even the newest members, the Aquatic Federation, had been seamlessly integrated into the Council's perfect harmony. Each species had earned their place through demonstrated mastery over their environment, their genetics, or the fundamental forces of the universe. The Altarians had transcended their physical limitations through cybernetic enhancement. The psionic dominion had evolved beyond the need for crude technology, manipulating matter with pure thought. The bioadaptive consortium had mastered genetic manipulation to the point where they could reshape themselves at will to survive any environment. This was civilization. This was order. This was how the galaxy was meant to function. The chime that interrupted Ambassador Zephyr's review was different from the usual harmonious tones that announced routine business. This sound was sharp, urgent, and carried undertones of confusion that immediately set her enhanced nervous system on edge. The central holodisplay flickered, then resolved into the image of Scanner Prime Nexus, the Council's chief intelligence coordinator. "Emergency session protocols are now active," Nexus announced, his mechanical voice carrying none of its usual calm certainty. "All ambassadors are required to attend immediately. We have a situation developing in Sector 779 that requires immediate Council attention." The chamber filled quickly as representatives from every member species took their designated positions. Ambassador Zephyr noted the subtle signs of agitation among her colleagues. The ethereal communion's gaseous forms were swirling faster than normal. The crystalline hegemony's usual perfect stillness was broken by almost imperceptible vibrations. Even the ancient and wise temporal observers seemed focused in a way that suggested genuine concern rather than their usual detached curiosity. Scanner Prime Nexus materialized in the center of the chamber, his holographic form larger than usual to accommodate the emergency session protocols. Behind him, the display showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy's outer rim, with a particular star system highlighted in pulsing amber warning lights. 14 hours ago, our automated monitoring stations detected an artificial construct entering Council space, Nexus began. Initial analysis suggested it was debris from a failed colonization attempt by one of the pre-spaceflight species we monitor. However, subsequent investigation has revealed something unprecedented. The display zoomed in on the star system, showing a small blue-green world orbiting a medium-sized yellow star. It was unremarkable in every way that mattered to the Council. No exotic energy signatures, no evidence of advanced technology, no psychic emanations or genetic manipulation beyond the crude natural selection that governed primitive worlds. "The construct appears to be a spacecraft of some kind," Nexus continued, "but its technology level is inconsistent with our understanding of technological development. The species that created it should be at least 3 centuries away from achieving interstellar flight, yet here it is." Ambassador Zephyr's enhanced cognitive processors were already running through possibilities. A gift from another species? Perhaps the Benevolent Guidance Protocol was activated without proper authorization. The Benevolent Guidance Protocol was one of the Council's most carefully regulated programs. Occasionally, a primitive species would show exceptional promise, and the Council would provide subtle technological assistance to accelerate their development. But such interventions required unanimous approval and decades of careful observation. "Negative," Nexus replied. "Deep analysis of the construct shows no evidence of Council technology or methodology. Furthermore, the species in question has never been considered for guidance protocol evaluation. Their psychological profiles indicate excessive aggression, territorial behavior, and a concerning tendency towards self-destructive actions." The temporal observer designated as Chronarch 77 spoke for the first time in 3 Council sessions. When beings who experience time as a navigable dimension chose to engage with linear conversation, it usually meant something significant was happening. "Show us the construct," Chronarch 77 intoned, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to echo from both past and future simultaneously. The display shifted, and Ambassador Zephyr felt her breathing apparatus flutter in surprise. The spacecraft was unlike anything she had ever seen. Where council vessels were elegant curves of exotic materials and energy fields, this thing was angular, crude, and seemingly held together by some kind of metallic bonding agent applied to the exterior. Primitive chemical thrusters provided propulsion. The hull appeared to be simple steel alloys. Most shocking of all, the power source seemed to be nothing more than controlled nuclear fusion. It looked like something a child might build from scrap metal and wishful thinking. This construct achieved interstellar flight? Asked Ambassador Helix Prime of the Bioadaptive Consortium. His current form rippled with disbelief, cellular structures shifting to better process this impossible information. Confirmed, Nexus replied. Furthermore, it appears to be carrying biological entities from the origin world. They are conscious, active, and have established what appears to be a permanent presence in the destination system. The chamber fell silent except for the ambient hum of life support systems and the soft whisper of the ethereal communion's agitated forms. Ambassador Zephyr's processors were struggling to integrate this information into any coherent framework. A species that should barely have mastered controlled flight was somehow traveling between stars using technology that belonged in a museum. Surely there is an error, she finally said. Our development models are based on thousands of successful civilizations. The technological requirements for interstellar travel cannot be circumvented. The energy requirements alone should be impossible for a species at their development level. The data has been verified 17 times using different analytical methods, Nexus responded. The construct is real. The achievement is real, and there is more. The display changed again, showing a series of energy signatures scattered across multiple star systems in the outer rim. Each signature represented another spacecraft, each one as impossible as the first. We have detected 43 additional constructs, Nexus announced. All appear to originate from the same species. All use the same primitive but apparently functional technology. The species has established what can only be described as an expanding interstellar presence using methods that our best scientists insist should not work. Ambassador Zephyr felt something she had not experienced since her cybernetic enhancement procedures had optimized her emotional responses. Genuine confusion. Her people had spent millennia perfecting their technology, carefully advancing through each stage of development according to established principles of physics and engineering. The idea that another species had simply ignored those principles and achieved the same results through brute force application of primitive methods was disturbing on a fundamental level. What do we know about the species itself? Asked Sage 7-9 of the Psionic Dominion, his mental voice rippling through the chamber with undertones of curiosity and concern. The display shifted to show detailed biological and psychological analyses. The creatures that appeared were bipedal, carbon-based, and utterly unremarkable by Council standards. No obvious genetic modifications. No cybernetic enhancements. No psychic abilities. They looked, Ambassador Zephyr thought, like something that had just crawled out of a primitive hunting-gathering society. They call themselves humans, Nexus continued. Average lifespan of approximately 80 standard years without technological enhancement. Limited sensory capabilities compared to Council norms. Relatively fragile physical structure. However, their psychological profiles present several concerning anomalies. Define concerning, Chronarch 7 requested. They appear to have no instinctive fear response to impossible odds, Nexus replied. When faced with challenges that should logically result in retreat or surrender, they instead demonstrate increased determination and creativity. They also show an unusual capacity for cooperation despite having strong individual survival instincts. Most concerning of all, they seem to treat technological limitations as problems to be solved rather than barriers to be accepted. Ambassador Zephyr's enhanced cognitive processes finally identified what was bothering her about this entire situation. They are problem solvers, she said slowly, but they are solving the wrong problems. Elaborate, requested Helix Prime. Our development models assume that species will advance through predictable stages, she explained. First, they master their environment, then they enhance themselves, then they develop the technology necessary for interstellar travel. These humans appear to have simply skipped several steps and forced their primitive technology to work through methods we do not understand. The chamber buzzed with discussion as representatives conferred in their various languages, communication methods, and dimensional phases. The ethereal communions swirled faster, their gaseous forms creating complex patterns that represented deep philosophical consideration. The crystalline hegemony's vibrations harmonized into what Ambassador Zephyr recognized as their equivalent of intense debate. Finally, Chronarch 77 spoke again. What are their intentions? Have they attempted communication? They have not responded to our standard first contact protocols, Nexus replied. However, analysis of their activities suggests they are engaged in what appears to be systematic exploration and colonization of uninhabited worlds. They do not seem aware of our existence, but their expansion vector will eventually bring them into direct contact with Council territory. The implications of that statement settled over the chamber like a cold wind. For 2,000 years, the Council had maintained peace and order through a simple principle. They were so technologically superior to any potential threats that conflict was impossible. They had weapons that could sterilize star systems, defenses that could withstand the output of entire suns, transportation systems that made the vast distances of space irrelevant. But their superiority had always been based on the assumption that other species would develop along predictable lines. The idea that a species might achieve interstellar capability through completely different methods, using technology that should not work but apparently did, was something their models had never accounted for. We need more information, Ambassador Zephyr declared. I propose we dispatch a first contact delegation to establish communication with these humans. We need to understand their technology, their intentions, and their capabilities. Agreed, said Sage 79. However, I recommend extreme caution. A species that can achieve the impossible through determination and creativity might not respond to our standard diplomatic approaches.
What do you mean?
I mean, Sage 79 replied, his mental voice carrying undertones of something that might have been worry, that everything we know about how civilized species behave might not apply to them. We are dealing with beings who look at the impossible and see it as a challenge to overcome rather than a boundary to respect. The vote to initiate formal contact was unanimous, but Ambassador Zephyr noticed that for the first time in her memory, the council chamber felt uncertain. They were about to make contact with a species that had already done something everyone knew was impossible. As the session ended and she returned to her quarters, Ambassador Zephyr found herself wondering if their perfect understanding of how the galaxy worked was about to be challenged by beings who had never bothered to learn the rules in the first place. The first human ship had appeared in council space exactly 18 hours ago. In that short time, it had managed to do something that no species in recorded history had ever accomplished. It had made the Galactic Council question their own superiority. And somewhere in the back of her enhanced mind, Ambassador Zephyr had the disturbing feeling that this was only the beginning. Captain Sarah Chen had seen a lot of strange things during her 15 years with the Terran colonial fleet, but the massive crystalline structure that had just materialized outside her viewport definitely ranked in the top 3. The USA's Defiant was 2 weeks out from New Sydney, conducting a routine survey of potentially habitable worlds, when every sensor on the ship had simultaneously started screaming warnings about an incoming spatial distortion. Captain, called Lieutenant Rodriguez from the sensor station, I'm reading massive energy signatures. Whatever that thing is, it's putting out more power than our entire home fleet combined. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but her pulse quickened. The colonial fleet had always known that humanity might not be alone in the galaxy, but their expansion over the past 50 years had encountered nothing but empty worlds and ancient ruins. The possibility of meeting another spacefaring civilization had moved from daily concern to theoretical exercise somewhere around the 10th uninhabited system they'd explored. Now, staring at something that looked like a living cathedral made of light and crystal, Sarah realized that theoretical exercise was about to become very real very quickly. Communications, are you picking up any signals? She asked. Negative on standard radio frequencies, replied Ensign Park. But there's something weird happening on the quantum bands. It's like someone's trying to talk to our computers directly. Sarah's training kicked in. First contact protocols were clear. Establish peaceful intentions, attempt communication, and under no circumstances reveal military capabilities or Earth's location until intentions were determined. Unfortunately, those protocols had been written by people who assumed alien contact would involve radio signals and gradual approach, not massive impossible structures appearing out of nowhere.
All stop, she ordered.
Maintain position, but power up defensive systems? Quietly. Rodriguez, I want a full analysis of that thing. Park, try to establish communication on all frequencies. Let them know we're here peacefully. The bridge of the Defiant buzzed with controlled activity. Sarah watched her crew work and felt the familiar mix of pride and concern that came with commanding a colonial survey ship. They were explorers first, but, like all colonial fleet vessels, the Defiant carried enough firepower to handle pirates, hostile wildlife, or the occasional territorial dispute. Against whatever technology could build something like the crystal structure outside, their weapons would probably be about as effective as throwing rocks. Captain Ensign Park called out, I'm getting something. It's not coming through normal communications. It's like the signal is being written directly into our computer memory. What does it say? Park looked confused. It's detailed. Really detailed. It's a complete linguistic analysis of our communications, psychological profiles of our crew based on ship configuration and behavior patterns, and what appears to be a formal diplomatic greeting in perfect English. All of it just appeared in our systems about 30 seconds ago. Sarah felt her blood chill. The alien structure had somehow learned English, analyzed her crew, and composed a diplomatic message in less time than it took her to order coffee. Either they were dealing with artificial intelligence beyond anything humanity had imagined, or these aliens processed information at speeds that made human thought look glacially slow. Put the message on screen, she ordered. The main display flickered, then resolved into text that was formatted in clean, professional diplomatic language. But as Sarah read, her concern deepened into genuine alarm. The message was polite, formally correct, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. The aliens identified themselves as representatives of something called the Galactic Council, claimed to have been monitoring human development for centuries, and were expressing surprise that humanity had achieved interstellar flight ahead of projected timelines. They requested permission to come aboard for formal diplomatic contact. "Captain," Rodriguez said quietly, "they've been watching us. For centuries. They know about Earth, our colonies, probably our entire expansion." Sarah nodded grimly. The message made it clear that humanity's expansion into space had not gone unnoticed. More concerning was the casual reference to projected timelines, as if human development was something these aliens had been actively tracking and predicting. "Draft a response," she ordered. "Standard diplomatic greeting. Confirm our peaceful intentions, but request that first contact take place in neutral space rather than aboard either vessel. Send it on all frequencies and upload it to our quantum communicators as well." The response came back in less than a minute, once again appearing directly in their computer systems without passing through any detectable communication channel. The aliens agreed to neutral space contact and provided coordinates for a location exactly halfway between the two vessels. They also, somewhat ominously, assured Captain Chen that appropriate safety protocols would be implemented to prevent any misunderstandings. An hour later, Sarah found herself in a shuttle heading toward what appeared to be a small space station that had materialized at the designated coordinates. The structure was elegant, crystalline, and completely impossible by human standards. Her shuttle's instruments couldn't even determine what it was made of, much less how it had been constructed so quickly. "This is either going to be the greatest day in human history or the worst," muttered Chief Petty Officer Johnson from the pilot's seat. "Let's aim for greatest," Sarah replied, checking her sidearm out of habit. The weapon made her feel slightly better, even though she suspected it would be about as useful as a harsh word against whatever technology these aliens possessed. The shuttle docked with the alien structure using an interface that somehow perfectly matched human docking standards, despite being built by beings who had never seen human technology before. As Sarah stepped through the airlock, she entered a chamber that was clearly designed to accommodate human physiology. The gravity was exactly Earth normal. The atmosphere was perfectly breathable. Even the lighting was calibrated to human visual preferences. Either these aliens were incredibly considerate hosts, or they knew more about human biology than most humans did. The being waiting for her was tall, elegant, and clearly artificial. The body was roughly humanoid, but composed of what appeared to be crystalline structures and flowing metal. When it spoke, the voice was pleasant and completely without emotion. "Captain Chen, welcome. I am Ambassador Zephyr 97 of the Altarian Collective, speaking on behalf of the Galactic Council. Please accept our gratitude for your cooperation in this historic meeting." Sarah extended her hand in the traditional human greeting and was surprised when the alien perfectly mimicked the gesture with a hand that felt surprisingly warm despite its obviously artificial nature. "Ambassador, on behalf of humanity, I'm honored to meet you. We've wondered for a long time if we were alone in the galaxy." "You are not alone," Zephyr replied. "The galaxy contains 47 spacefaring civilizations, all of whom are members of the Galactic Council. We maintain peace and order throughout known space, and we are very interested in learning how humanity achieved interstellar flight using your unique technological approach." There was something in the way the ambassador said "unique" that made Sarah's instincts start screaming warnings. It sounded less like admiration and more like the tone someone might use to describe a dangerous animal that had learned an unexpected trick. "We'd be happy to share our technological development with the Council," Sarah replied carefully. "We're always interested in peaceful cooperation and the exchange of knowledge." "Excellent," Zephyr said. "However, before we proceed with formal diplomatic relations, the Council requires certain assurances regarding human intentions and capabilities. Your rapid expansion and unconventional technology have raised some concerns among our member species. Sarah felt her diplomatic training warring with her military instincts. The alien's tone remained perfectly polite, but the underlying message was clear. Humanity was being evaluated for potential threats. The fact that they'd been under observation for centuries suggested this evaluation had been going on for quite some time. "What kind of assurances?" she asked. "Standard protocols for integrating new species into the galactic community," Zephyr replied smoothly. "Technological assessments to ensure compatibility with Council safety standards. Psychological evaluation to determine societal stability. Temporary restrictions on expansion while proper diplomatic frameworks are established." The words were diplomatic, but Sarah heard what they really meant. Surrender your weapons, submit to alien psychological analysis, and stop expanding until we decide whether you're dangerous. It was the kind of offer that sounded reasonable until you realized it left you completely helpless. "I appreciate the Council's caution," Sarah said carefully, "but humanity would need to know more about these protocols before agreeing to anything. We're naturally cautious when dealing with unknown situations." "Of course," Zephyr replied. "However, the Council's protocols exist for the protection of all galactic civilizations. Your technology, while impressive in its results, operates outside established safety parameters. Several Council species have expressed concern about potential risks." "What kind of risks?" "Your fusion drives emit radiation signatures that could interfere with sensitive Council technologies. Your manufacturing processes utilize materials and methods that could be environmentally hazardous. Most concerning, your psychological profiles suggest a species with unusually high aggression and risk-taking tendencies." Sarah felt her temper starting to rise. "Aggression? We're explorers and colonists. We haven't shown aggression toward anyone." "No," Zephyr agreed, "but your historical records indicate frequent warfare among your own species, and your expansion methodology shows concerning disregard for established territorial boundaries." "What territorial boundaries?" "We've only colonized uninhabited worlds that were designated as buffer zones by the Council. While not actively claimed by any member species, they serve important functions in maintaining galactic stability." The conversation was spiraling rapidly toward confrontation, and Sarah realized she was walking into a trap. The aliens were painting humanity as dangerous, unstable, and violating laws they'd never been told existed. Every response she made could be interpreted as evidence of human aggression or unreasonableness. "Ambassador," she said, forcing her voice to remain calm, "I think there may be some misunderstanding here. Humanity had no knowledge of Council territorial designations. If we had, we certainly would have respected them. Perhaps we could establish proper diplomatic channels to resolve any territorial issues." "Certainly," Zephyr replied. "However, such resolution would require humanity to acknowledge Council authority in territorial matters and submit to proper integration protocols. As the established governing body of galactic civilization, the Council must ensure that all spacefaring species operate within acceptable parameters." And there it was. The real demand hidden beneath diplomatic language: submit to alien authority or be considered a rogue threat. Sarah's military training recognized the ultimatum for what it was, even wrapped in polite diplomatic terminology. "The integration protocols you mentioned," Sarah said, "what exactly would they involve?" "Temporary cessation of expansion activities pending territorial review. Submission of all technological specifications for safety evaluation. Establishment of Council monitoring stations in human space to ensure compliance with galactic safety standards. Quite reasonable, really. Reasonable if you were willing to become a subject species." Sarah realized that the first contact scenario humanity had always imagined, where two equal civilizations met and exchanged knowledge, was never going to happen. The Council saw humanity as a problem to be managed, not a civilization to be respected. "Ambassador, I appreciate the Council's position, but I don't have the authority to agree to such significant changes in human policy. These decisions would need to be made by our government leaders after careful consideration." "Of course," Zephyr said. "However, the Council cannot permit continued human expansion while these matters remain unresolved. For the safety of all galactic civilizations, human vessels will need to restrict their activities to already established colonies until proper protocols are implemented." Sarah felt her diplomatic options evaporating. The alien was politely but firmly demanding that humanity stop expanding, submit to alien oversight, and accept restrictions on their sovereignty. When humanity inevitably refused, the Council would have justification for taking more direct action. I understand the Council's position, Sarah said, but I'm certain that humanity would want to explore all diplomatic options before accepting such restrictions. Naturally, Zephyr replied. The Council values peaceful resolution of all disputes. However, given the potential risks posed by unregulated human technology and expansion, we may need to implement temporary protective measures while diplomatic discussions proceed. The threat was clear now. Agree to submit or face the consequences. Sarah found herself wondering how many other species had been given similar ultimatums over the past 2,000 years. How long would these temporary measures last, she asked, until the Council determines that humanity can be safely integrated into the galactic community? The timeline would depend entirely on human cooperation with the integration process. In other words, indefinitely. Sarah realized that she was looking at the end of human independence, wrapped up in diplomatic language and presented as a reasonable compromise. The Council had probably been planning this conversation since they first detected human expansion. Ambassador, I'll need to relay this conversation to my superiors immediately. This is obviously a decision that affects all of humanity. Of course. However, Captain Shen, I feel obligated to mention that the Council takes a very dim view of species that reject reasonable diplomatic solutions. The galaxy is a dangerous place for civilizations that operate outside established frameworks. The message was clear: submit or be destroyed. Sarah felt a cold anger building in her chest. Humanity had pulled itself out of the gravity well of Earth through determination, ingenuity, and willingness to take risks. They'd built their ships with their own hands, found their own worlds, and solved their own problems. Now they were being told to give it all up for the privilege of being supervised by aliens who saw them as dangerous primitives. I understand, Ambassador, Sarah replied. I'll make sure my superiors understand the Council's position completely. Excellent. The Council looks forward to humanity's positive response to our reasonable proposals. As Sarah returned to her shuttle, she was already composing the message that would change everything. The Council had made one critical error in their diplomatic approach. They'd assumed that humanity would react to overwhelming superiority the way every other species apparently had. They were about to learn that humans had a different response to being told something was impossible. They took it as a challenge. The message Sarah sent back to Earth was brief and direct. First contact established. Galactic Council demands submission or will consider humanity a threat. Recommend immediate military consultation. They think our technology shouldn't work and our psychology is dangerously unpredictable. They may be right about both. As the Defiant jumped to hyperspace carrying news that would reach every human colony within weeks, Ambassador Zephyr 97 filed her report to the Council. She noted humanity's reluctance to accept reasonable diplomatic solutions and recommended that enforcement protocols be prepared. Neither side realized they had just declared a war that would reshape the galaxy forever. The Council assumed they were dealing with another primitive species that would eventually see reason. Humanity assumed they were dealing with just another problem that needed solving. Both were about to discover just how wrong they were. Admiral Marcus Rodriguez had been expecting the call ever since Captain Chen's initial report reached Earth 6 days ago. What he hadn't expected was to be summoned to an emergency joint session of the United Earth Defense Council, the Colonial Administration, and representatives from every major human settlement in known space. The hastily constructed holographic conference room in Geneva was packed with the faces of humanity's leaders, and every single one of them looked like they'd been drinking coffee and arguing for days straight. "Admiral," said Director Williams of the Colonial Administration, "tell us your professional assessment. Can we fight them?" Marcus studied the tactical displays floating above the conference table. 6 days of frantic intelligence gathering had produced a picture that should have been terrifying. The Galactic Council commanded technology that was centuries ahead of humanity's best efforts. They had weapons that could sterilize planets, ships that moved faster than anything humans had ever conceived, and resources that spanned thousands of star systems. By every rational calculation, humanity was facing impossible odds against an enemy that could crush them without breaking a sweat. "Honestly," Marcus replied, "we shouldn't stand a chance. Their technology is so far advanced that it's like comparing a musket to a nuclear missile. They have advantages we can't match and resources we can't compete with." The room fell silent. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Director Chen of the Mars Colonial Council looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past week. "However," Marcus continued, "I've spent the last 6 days analyzing every piece of data we have about Council technology and tactics, and I think they've made some critical errors in their assessment of human capabilities." President Sarah Thompson of Earth leaned forward. "Explain they think like engineers," Marcus said. "Perfect, logical, efficient engineers." Their technology is elegant, their strategies are mathematical, and their approach to problems is to apply overwhelming superiority until the problem goes away. It's worked for them for 2,000 years because every species they've encountered has operated according to the same basic principles. And we don't? Asked General Kim from the Lunar Defense Force. We don't, Marcus confirmed. Captain Chen's report makes it clear that they're baffled by our technology. They keep calling it impossible and inefficient, but it works. They can't understand how we achieved interstellar flight using primitive fusion drives and crude manufacturing techniques. He activated the display showing a comparison between a council vessel and a human colonial ship. The council ship was sleek, elegant, and looked like it had been grown rather than built. The human ship looked like exactly what it was, a collection of modules, engines, and habitation spaces bolted together by people who had more determination than advanced materials. The council builds their ships like works of art, Marcus explained. Every component is perfectly integrated, every system is optimized, every piece of technology represents the pinnacle of their scientific achievement. It's beautiful, it's efficient, and it's probably more advanced than anything we'll build in the next century. But, prompted Director Williams, but when something goes wrong, they need a shipyard and a team of specialists to fix it. When something goes wrong with one of our ships, Chief Peterson breaks out the welding torch and spare parts and fixes it with whatever's handy. Our technology is crude, but it's robust. It's adaptable. And most importantly, it can be maintained and modified by ordinary people with basic tools. Admiral Sarah Chen, recently promoted after her encounter with the Council, nodded from her position at the tactical station. During the diplomatic meeting, their ambassador seemed genuinely confused by our expansion methodology. She kept referring to our unconventional approaches and safety violations. I think they expect spacefaring species to expand slowly and carefully, with massive support infrastructure and perfect planning. Instead, we just pointed our ships at empty star systems and figured out the details when we got there, added Director Martinez from the Proxima colony. Half our settlements were built with equipment that was never designed for the conditions we found. Exactly, Marcus said, and that terrifies them. They've created a perfect, orderly, predictable galaxy where everyone follows the same rules and uses the same methodologies. We showed up and demonstrated that their rules are optional. President Thompson was studying the tactical displays with the expression of someone who had spent decades in military service before entering politics. Admiral, you're describing advantages that won't matter if they can simply destroy our ships from light years away with weapons we can't defend against. That's true if we try to fight them using conventional tactics, Marcus agreed. But I don't think we should. In fact, I think we should do exactly what they don't expect. We should fight them using the same primitive and unconventional approaches that got us to the stars in the first place. He activated another display, this one showing a strategic overview of human space and the estimated positions of Council forces. They expect us to mass our fleets and engage in pitched battles using established military doctrine. They expect us to try to match their technology with technology of our own. They expect us to behave like every other species they've encountered over the past 2 millennia. What do you propose instead? Asked General Kim. Marcus smiled grimly. We fight like humans. We use every dirty trick, improvised solution, and desperate gamble that got our ancestors out of caves and onto other worlds. We make them deal with the one thing their perfect, orderly civilization has never had to handle, which is chaos. The room buzzed with discussion as humanity's leaders began to understand the implications of Marcus's proposal. Admiral Chen was nodding slowly, her expression shifting from concern to something that might have been anticipation. You're talking about guerrilla warfare on an interstellar scale, she said. I'm talking about fighting the way humans have always fought when facing impossible odds, Marcus replied. We adapt. We improvise. We use every advantage we can find and make up new ones when we need them. The Council has spent 2,000 years preparing for wars against civilized, predictable enemies. They've never fought anyone crazy enough to strap explosives to mining equipment and ram it into their perfect formations. Director Williams looked alarmed. Admiral, are you seriously proposing that we use suicide attacks against superior forces? I'm proposing that we use everything that works, Marcus replied firmly. The Council's entire philosophy is based on overwhelming superiority and mathematical certainty. They win because their enemies look at the odds, calculate their chances, and surrender. But humans don't surrender when the odds are impossible. We get creative. He brought up another display, this one showing colonial mining and manufacturing operations scattered across human space. We have something the Council doesn't expect, he continued. We have an entire civilian population that knows how to build, repair, and modify complex technology using whatever materials are available. Every colonial engineer is used to solving problems that shouldn't have solutions. Every mining operation has equipment that's been modified far beyond its original specifications. Every settlement has had to innovate its way out of situations that would have killed anyone else. You're talking about total war, President Thompson said quietly. I'm talking about survival, Marcus replied. The Council isn't offering us a choice between war and peace. They're offering us a choice between submission and war. And if we submit, we cease to exist as an independent species. Our colonies become their protectorates. Our technology becomes their property. Our future becomes whatever they decide to allow us. The room fell silent as the full implications sank in. Director Chen was the first to speak. How long do we have to prepare? Council ships are already moving toward human space, Admiral Chen replied. Based on Captain Chen's intelligence and our observations of their technology, I estimate they'll be in position to blockade our major colonies within 3 months. They'd probably expect the threat to be enough to force our surrender. Will it work? Asked General Kim. Marcus looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. He saw fear, uncertainty, and concern, but he also saw determination, anger, and the kind of stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had carried humans from Earth to the stars. Not if we don't let it, he said. But this isn't going to be a clean war with clear victories and negotiated surrenders. If we fight the Council, we need to be prepared for a conflict that could last decades. We need to be willing to sacrifice everything for the chance to remain free. And we need to accept that we might lose. President Thompson was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of speaking for all of humanity. Admiral, what do you need to give us the best chance of winning? Marcus had been preparing for that question since the moment he'd read Captain Chen's report. Complete mobilization of all human resources. Military, civilian, industrial, everything. I need every ship converted for combat capability. I need every colonial engineer working on weapons development. I need every settlement prepared to defend itself or evacuate on short notice. And I need authorization to use any and all tactics that might give us an advantage, regardless of how unconventional or risky they might be. You're asking for a blank check to fight an interstellar war using whatever methods you think might work, Director Williams observed. Yes, Marcus replied without hesitation. Because the alternative is extinction as a free species. The vote was surprisingly quick. 47 colonial representatives in Earth's Leadership Council voted unanimously to authorize total mobilization for defense against the Galactic Council. The margin of agreement suggested that news of the Council's ultimatum had already spread throughout human space, and the response was universal. They could go to hell. As the conference ended and representatives began planning their return to their respective colonies, Marcus found himself alone with Admiral Chen and President Thompson. Marcus, the president said quietly, do you really think we can win this? I think we can make them regret starting it, he replied. The Council has been in power for 2,000 years because no one has ever been crazy enough to fight them. They're about to discover what happens when perfect order meets complete chaos. And if we lose? Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking about the children playing in the corridors of the space stations, the families building new lives on distant worlds, and the explorers pushing ever further into the unknown. If we lose fighting, he said finally, at least we lose as humans. If we surrender, we lose everything that makes us human. As news of the decision spread throughout human space, something unprecedented began to happen. Colonial miners started welding armor plating to their industrial ships. Cargo haulers began mounting weapons systems designed for asteroid defense. Research stations started experimenting with technologies that had always been considered too dangerous or unpredictable for practical use. The Galactic Council had spent centuries dealing with civilized species that fought wars according to established rules and predictable patterns. They had never encountered a civilization that treated impossible odds as a personal insult and responded to superior technology by getting creative with explosives. They were about to receive their first education in human warfare, and the lesson was going to be expensive for everyone involved. In the depths of space, Council fleets moved toward human territory with the confident precision of forces that had never known defeat. They expected to find frightened colonists ready to negotiate surrender in the face of overwhelming opposition. Instead, they were about to encounter something the galaxy hadn't seen in 2 millennia, a species that preferred to go down fighting rather than live on their knees. The war that would reshape the galaxy forever was about to begin, and neither side fully understood what they were starting. The Council expected a brief police action against an unruly primitive species. Humanity expected to die fighting against impossible odds. Both were wrong. But only one side was about to adapt to the new reality faster than anyone thought possible. Fleet Commander Axiom 7 Alpha of the Council Enforcement Division had overseen 43 compliance operations during her 3-century career, and every single one had followed the same predictable pattern: a show of force, a demonstration of superior technology, a brief negotiation, and then either voluntary compliance or a short, decisive engagement that ended with the primitive species accepting Council authority. The human operation should have been no different. Her fleet of 12 heavy cruisers and accompanying support vessels represented more firepower than most primitive species could comprehend, let alone resist. The humans had crude fusion drives, basic metallurgy, and no defensive technology worth mentioning. By every reasonable calculation, they should have surrendered the moment her fleet entered their space. Instead, they had responded to her demand for immediate compliance with what could only be described as a declaration of war. Not just any declaration of war, but one that seemed to take personal offense at the suggestion that they should behave reasonably in the face of overwhelming odds. "Fleet Commander," reported Tactical Specialist Nexus 44, "human colonial vessels are moving throughout their territory, but not in any pattern that conforms to standard evacuation or defensive protocols." Axiom 7 Alpha studied the tactical display with growing confusion. Human ships were indeed moving, but their behavior made no military sense. Instead of concentrating their forces for defense or fleeing to minimize casualties, they seemed to be dispersing randomly throughout their territory. Some were moving toward council positions, others were heading toward empty star systems. A few appeared to be accelerating toward the edge of known space. "Analysis?" she requested. "Unknown," Nexus 44 replied with a mechanical equivalent of frustration. "Their movements do not match any tactical doctrine in our databases. They appear to be either completely disorganized or operating according to principles we do not understand." Axiom 7 Alpha's cybernetic enhancements included tactical analysis systems developed over millennia of successful military operations. Those systems were currently providing her with contradictory assessments that ranged from enemy forces in complete disarray to unknown strategic deployment requiring immediate investigation. "Communications? Have the humans responded to our final compliance demand?" "Yes, Fleet Commander." The message was brief. "Display it." The main screen flickered, then showed a simple text message from the Human Colonial Administration. "Come and take it." Axiom 7 Alpha stared at the message for several seconds. In her 3 centuries of military service, she had never received a response to a compliance demand that was both so brief and so clearly dismissive of overwhelming opposition. Most species at least attempted to negotiate or requested time to consider their options. "Fleet Commander, called Scanner Prime Vortex from the sensor station. I'm detecting unusual energy signatures from several human vessels. They appear to be modifying their technology in real time." "Explain." "Human mining vessels are installing what appears to be combat equipment. Cargo haulers are mounting weapon systems. Even civilian transport ships are being fitted with armor plating and defensive systems. The modifications are crude but extensive." Axiom 7 Alpha felt her tactical system struggling to categorize what she was seeing. Military doctrine assumed that combat vessels and civilian vessels were distinct categories with clearly defined roles. The idea that an entire civilization would spontaneously convert its civilian fleet into military assets was beyond her programming to fully process. "Estimated combat effectiveness of modified civilian vessels?" "Minimal by Council standards," Vortex replied. "However, they appear to be optimizing for different parameters than standard military doctrine would suggest. Instead of maximizing firepower or defensive capability, they seem to be emphasizing speed, maneuverability, and improvisation capability." "Improvisation capability is not a military parameter," Axiom 7 Alpha stated. "No, Fleet Commander. But human vessels appear to be designed with extensive modification potential. They can be rapidly reconfigured for different mission profiles using standardized components." The tactical implications were disturbing. Council forces excelled at destroying known threats using established methodologies. But if the enemy could continuously modify their capabilities during combat, standard tactical analysis became much more difficult. "Fleet deployment orders remain unchanged," Axiom 7 Alpha decided. "Proceed to primary human colonial system and demand immediate surrender. If surrender is refused, implement standard compliance enforcement protocols." The Council fleet moved through hyperspace with the perfect coordination of forces that had never known defeat. Each vessel maintained precisely calculated distances from its companions. Each system operated at peak efficiency. Each crew member performed their assigned duties with mechanical precision. They emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the New Sydney system. humanity's largest colonial settlement, expecting to find frightened civilians and a token defensive force that would quickly realize the futility of resistance. Instead, they found what could only be described as organized chaos. The system was full of human vessels, but none of them were where military doctrine suggested they should be. Instead of forming defensive formations around the colony, human ships were scattered throughout the system in patterns that seemed random. Some were accelerating toward the Council fleet, others were moving toward the system's asteroid belt. A few appeared to be heading directly for the system's star. Fleet Commander, Nexus 44 reported, human forces are not responding according to any known tactical doctrine. We've identified approximately 200 vessels of various configurations, but they do not appear to be forming any coherent battle formation. Axiom 7 Alpha suggested, proceed with standard intimidation protocols. The Council flagship activated its primary communication array and broadcast a message on all frequencies. Human vessels, you are in violation of Galactic Council territorial and safety protocols. Surrender immediately for processing and relocation to approved settlement zones. Resistance will result in immediate implementation of enforcement actions. The response came back within minutes, but not from a single source. Dozens of human vessels began broadcasting simultaneously, creating a cacophony of voices that seemed designed more to confuse than communicate. Council ships, this is Captain Martinez of the New Sydney Miners Union. We've got a cargo hold full of refined uranium and a really bad attitude. You want to talk compliance? Come and get some. This is the modified freight hauler Big Bertha, and we've been welding armor plating for 3 weeks. Our hull looks like hell, but our new torpedo tubes work just fine. Council Fleet, this is Research Station Tango 7. We've been working on some really interesting applications of fusion technology. Want to see what happens when you overcharge a mining laser? Axiom 7 Alpha's communication systems were struggling to process the flood of messages, most of which seemed to be individual human vessels issuing personal challenges to her entire fleet. It was unprecedented, unprofessional, and completely contrary to every principle of civilized warfare. Fleet Commander, Vortex called out with obvious alarm, I'm detecting massive energy spikes from human vessels throughout the system. They appear to be overcharging their power systems far beyond safe operating parameters. For what purpose? Unknown. The energy signatures are inconsistent with any known weapon systems, but the power levels are approaching critical thresholds. On the tactical display, human vessels began accelerating toward the Council fleet with complete disregard for safe approach velocities. But instead of forming attack formations, they seemed to be improvising their approaches based on individual initiative. Some were coming straight in at maximum speed. Others were using the system's gravity wells to slingshot toward Council positions. A few appeared to be hiding in the asteroid belt, waiting for unknown opportunities. Fleet Commander, Nexus 44 announced, lead human vessels will be within weapons range in 17 minutes. Recommend deploying to combat formation and preparing for engagement. Axiom 7 Alpha gave the deployment order, and her fleet shifted into the perfect geometric formation that had dominated galactic warfare for centuries. Each vessel took its assigned position with mechanical precision, weapon systems powered up with smooth efficiency, defensive screens activated at optimal intervals. The human response was immediate and completely insane. Instead of trying to match the Council's formation with one of their own, the approaching human vessels suddenly scattered in all directions. Some accelerated directly toward the Council fleet at ramming speed. Others began weaving erratic courses that made targeting calculations almost impossible. A few actually seemed to be spinning end over end while maintaining their approach vectors. Fleet Commander, Vortex called out in obvious confusion, human tactical behavior does not conform to any known military doctrine. Their movements appear random, but they're maintaining coordinated timing despite having no apparent command structure. Impossible. Military forces require centralized command and control to function effectively. Yes, Fleet Commander. However, human forces appear to be operating on individual initiative while maintaining overall strategic coordination. It should not work, but it is working. The first human vessel entered weapons range moving faster than anything its size should have been able to achieve. Instead of slowing for combat, it continued accelerating while broadcasting a stream of what appeared to be profanity and technical specifications for mining explosives. Fleet Commander, incoming vessel is the modified mining ship Crazy Eddie. It appears to be loaded with refined fissile material and is on a collision course with our formation. Axiom 7 Alpha's tactical systems finally identified what the humans were doing, and the realization was disturbing on multiple levels. They weren't trying to win a conventional engagement. They were trying to cause as much damage as possible using whatever methods they could improvise. All vessels engage incoming threats. Target the vessel designated Crazy Eddie with primary weapons. The Council fleet's response was swift and precise. Energy beams that could vaporize asteroids focused on the approaching mining ship. But the human vessel didn't behave like ships were supposed to behave when faced with overwhelming firepower. Instead of being destroyed cleanly, it seemed to come apart in sections while continuing its approach. Pieces of hull plating separated to reveal internal compartments that were themselves armed and maneuverable. Fleet Commander, the target vessel was apparently designed to fragment under fire while maintaining attack capability. The separated sections are continuing their approach and appear to be individually guided. It was like fighting an enemy that had weaponized the concept of controlled demolition. The Council's perfect energy weapons were designed to destroy targets efficiently and completely. But the human vessel seemed designed to be destroyed in a way that maximized the threat potential of its component parts. The first fragment of Crazy Eddie impacted the Council flagship's defensive screens at relativistic velocity. The screens absorbed the kinetic energy easily, but the impact triggered something unexpected. The fragment exploded, but not with the clean nuclear fire of proper military ordnance. Instead, it seemed to release a cloud of metallic particles that immediately began interfering with the flagship's sensor arrays. Fleet Commander sensor efficiency is down 30% and degrading. The metallic particles appear to be self-replicating and are actively disrupting our scanning capabilities. More human vessels were entering weapons range, and each one seemed to have its own unique approach to causing problems. A modified cargo hauler launched a spread of what appeared to be standard missiles, but when the Council's defensive systems engaged them, the missiles released clouds of chaff that interfered with targeting sensors. A converted passenger liner accelerated directly toward the Council formation while broadcasting human music at volumes that overwhelmed communication frequencies. Fleet Commander, this is not conventional warfare. The humans appear to be treating this engagement as an opportunity to field test experimental technologies and unconventional tactics. Axiom 7 Alpha's tactical systems were being overwhelmed by the sheer variety of threats they were being asked to assess. Council military doctrine was based on engaging enemies who used known technologies according to established principles, but the humans seemed to be making up new technologies and tactics in real time, using whatever materials and methods were available to them. A modified research vessel suddenly appeared from behind an asteroid, accelerating on what appeared to be a massively overcharged fusion drive. It was broadcasting technical data about controlled stellar engineering while heading directly for the Council fleet's support vessels. Fleet Commander, the research vessel appears to have converted its primary laboratory into a weapons system. I'm reading energy signatures consistent with directed fusion reactions. The vessel exploded before reaching its target, but the explosion was clearly intentional and carefully timed. Instead of a simple detonation, it created an expanding sphere of superheated plasma that interfered with the Council fleet's formation and forced several vessels to alter course. Status report, Axiom 7 Alpha commanded. 14 human vessels destroyed or disabled, Nexus 4 replied. However, Council fleet efficiency is down 40% due to sensor interference, communication jamming, and debris field navigation requirements. Human forces continue to engage using unconventional methods that do not respond to standard countermeasures. Axiom 7 Alpha stared at the tactical display with growing realization. Our fleet was winning by every measurable standard. They were destroying human vessels at a rate of more than 3 to 1. Human weapons were barely capable of penetrating Council defenses. By all logical calculations, the battle should have been over within the first hour. But the humans weren't trying to win a conventional battle. They were trying to prove that they couldn't be easily conquered, and they were succeeding. Every human vessel that was destroyed took some small piece of Council efficiency with it. Every unconventional attack forced the Council fleet to adapt their tactics slightly. Every improvised weapon demonstrated that human creativity was more dangerous than human technology. Fleet Commander, Vortex announced, I'm detecting additional human vessels entering the system. Estimated numbers exceed 500 and increasing. From where? Unknown. They appear to be arriving from multiple vectors, suggesting coordinated deployment from throughout human space. However, many of the vessels are not military in nature. I'm reading mining ships, cargo haulers, research vessels, and what appears to be converted civilian transports. Axiom 7 Alpha felt something she had never experienced in 3 centuries of military service. Uncertainty about the outcome of a battle she was clearly winning. The humans were losing ships at an unsustainable rate, but their reinforcements seemed to be arriving faster than she could destroy them. More concerning, each wave of human vessels seemed to be better adapted to fighting Council forces, as if they were learning from the destruction of their predecessors. All vessels implement maximum firepower protocols. priority targeting on incoming human vessels. The Council fleet's response was devastating. Energy weapons that could crack planets focused on the approaching human forces. The destruction was absolute and continuous. Human vessels were vaporized by the dozens, their primitive technology no match for the concentrated firepower of the galaxy's most advanced military forces. But for every human ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place, and each replacement seemed to be slightly better prepared for what it was facing. Mining ships arrived with improvised armor that absorbed more punishment before failing. Cargo haulers came equipped with weapons that were more effective against Council defenses. Research vessels brought experimental technologies that caused new and unexpected problems. Fleet Commander, Nexus 44 reported, human forces are adapting their tactics in real time based on observed Council capabilities. This should not be possible without centralized command and control systems, but it is happening. How? Unknown. Human vessels appear to be sharing tactical data continuously and modifying their approach based on collective learning. Each destroyed vessel provides information that makes subsequent vessels more effective. Axiom 7 Alpha realized she was witnessing something unprecedented, a species that was treating a military defeat as a learning experience and adapting faster than her forces could exploit their advantages. The humans were losing the battle, but they were winning the war of adaptation. The final realization came when her tactical systems calculated the long-term outcome based on observed trends. At the current rate of human adaptation and reinforcement, the Council fleet would eventually be overwhelmed, not by superior technology or tactics, but by sheer persistence and creativity. All vessels, implement withdrawal to safe distance. Prepare for extended siege operations. As the Council fleet pulled back to regroup and reassess, the surviving human vessels did something that defied all military logic. They began salvaging their own destroyed ships while continuing to prepare for the next engagement. Fleet Commander Axiom 7 Alpha filed her first report to the Council High Command that contained a phrase she had never expected to use. Human forces demonstrate combat effectiveness beyond initial projections. Recommend reassessment of threat classification and deployment of additional resources. The war that was supposed to last a few days was just getting started, and both sides were beginning to realize that their assumptions about their enemies were dangerously inadequate. High Counselor Eternal Wisdom 7 stood before the assembled representatives of 47 galactic civilizations, and for the first time in her 4-century tenure, she was about to deliver a report that contained the word failure. The emergency session had been called after 18 months of what should have been a brief police action against a primitive human uprising had turned into the first sustained military conflict the Council had faced in over 800 years. The holographic display showed a strategic map of what had once been called the Human Containment Zone, but was now referred to by military personnel as the Chaos Sector. Red markers indicated active human settlements. Orange markers showed contested systems. Yellow markers represented areas where Council forces maintained nominal control but faced continuous guerrilla activity. There were far more red and orange markers than there should have been. Esteemed representatives, High Counselor Eternal Wisdom 7 began, her synthesized voice carrying undertones of controlled frustration. After 18 months of sustained military operations against human colonial forces, I must report that the situation has escalated beyond our initial projections. The chamber buzzed with the various communication methods of its diverse membership. The ethereal communion swirled faster, their gaseous forms creating agitated patterns. The crystalline hegemony's harmonic vibrations increased in frequency. Even the ancient temporal observers seemed to be paying closer attention than usual. Define escalated, requested Ambassador Zephyr 9-7 of the Altarian Collective. Her own encounter with human diplomacy had marked the beginning of this debacle, and she bore personal responsibility for the initial miscalculation. Human forces have not only failed to surrender in the face of overwhelming opposition, the High Counselor replied, but have actually expanded their territorial control during the period of active conflict. They currently occupy 17 systems that were designated as restricted Council buffer zones and have established permanent military installations in 43 additional locations. The chamber fell silent except for the ambient hum of life support systems. Ambassador Helix Prime of the Bioadaptive Consortium was the first to speak. How is that possible? Our military reports indicated continuous human losses at unsustainable rates. Human losses have indeed been severe. High Counselor Eternal Wisdom 7 confirmed. Current estimates suggest they have lost approximately 60% of their original colonial fleet and suffered civilian casualties in the hundreds of thousands. By all conventional military analysis, they should have surrendered or collapsed entirely within the first 6 months. But, prompted Sage 7-9 of the Psionic Dominion, But human forces appear to treat severe casualties as motivation for increased resistance rather than incentive for surrender. More concerning, their military capabilities have improved dramatically during the conflict. They are no longer using primitive fusion drives and basic metallurgy. The holographic display shifted to show technical analyses of captured human technology. The representatives studied the data with growing alarm. The crude, improvised equipment that had characterized early human vessels had been replaced by sophisticated systems that showed clear evidence of rapid technological development. "They are learning," observed Chronarch 77 of the Temporal Observers, "at an unprecedented rate." "Confirmed," the High Counselor replied. "Human technological advancement during wartime has exceeded their previous development rate by factors of 10 to 20. They appear to be using captured council technology as inspiration for their own innovations, but adapting it to their existing manufacturing and operational methods." She activated a new display showing a comparison between early human vessels and their current generation of warships. The difference was startling. Where the original colonial ships had been clearly civilian vessels modified for military use, the new human warships were purpose-built for combat and showed design philosophies that were disturbingly effective. Fleet Commander Axiom 7 Alpha reports that human vessels no longer behave according to predictable tactical patterns, the High Counselor continued. They have developed what appears to be a doctrine of adaptive improvisation that makes strategic planning extremely difficult. "Explain adaptive improvisation," requested Ambassador Zephyr 97. "Human forces appear to modify their tactics, technology, and strategic objectives in real time, based on battlefield conditions. Instead of following predetermined battle plans, they respond to changing circumstances by creating new approaches on demand. Our tactical analysis systems are unable to predict their behavior because they appear to be continuously inventing new methods of warfare." The implications of that statement sank into the chamber like a cold weight. For 2 millennia, the Council had maintained peace through superior technology and predictable application of overwhelming force. Their entire military philosophy was based on the assumption that warfare followed logical principles that could be analyzed, predicted, and countered through systematic application of advanced technology. The idea that an enemy might simply abandon systematic warfare in favor of continuous improvisation was something their models had never accounted for. "Current estimates of human military strength?" asked General Prime Nexus Alpha of the Mechanoid Collective. "Unknown," the High Counselor replied, and several representatives reacted with visible surprise. "Human forces do not appear to maintain centralized military records or standardized unit designations. They operate as autonomous cells that coordinate through methods we do not fully understand. Our intelligence estimates range from a low of 200 active military vessels to a high of over 3,000, depending on how one defines military vessel in the context of human operations." "How can the range be so large?" demanded Helix Prime. "Because humans do not appear to distinguish between civilian and military assets in the manner that civilized species do," the High Counselor explained. "Mining ships, cargo haulers, research vessels, and even passenger transports have been observed engaging in military operations. Conversely, dedicated military vessels have been observed conducting mining, construction, and colonization activities. The traditional categories of analysis do not apply to human organizational methods." Ambassador Zephyr 97 was studying the tactical displays with growing concern. "High Counselor, are you suggesting that humanity has converted its entire civilization to military purposes? That appears to be the case. Every human settlement now serves multiple functions, including military support. Every civilian vessel is designed with combat modification potential. Every human citizen appears to have received some form of military training. They have achieved something we believed was impossible: total mobilization without sacrificing civilian productivity." The chamber erupted in discussion as the implications became clear. The Council's military doctrine assumed that civilized species would maintain clear distinctions between military and civilian assets, allowing for precise targeting and graduated response. But if an entire civilization had become militarized while maintaining its civilian functions, traditional concepts of proportional response became meaningless. "Fleet Commander Axiom 7 Alpha has requested additional resources," the High Counselor continued. "Specifically, she has asked for authorization to deploy the full Council battle fleet against human positions." The request sent a shock through the chamber. The Council battle fleet had never been deployed in its entirety. It represented the combined military might of 47 advanced civilizations and was theoretically capable of sterilizing entire star systems. Its deployment had always been considered a theoretical option for dealing with existential threats to galactic civilization. "For use against a primitive species that achieved spaceflight less than a century ago?" asked Sage 79 incredulously. Fleet Commander Axiom 7 Alpha reports that humans are no longer a primitive species, the High Counselor replied grimly. Their rate of technological and tactical adaptation suggests they will achieve rough parity with Council forces within 2 to 3 years at current development rates. She recommends immediate deployment of overwhelming force before human capabilities improve further. Chronarch 7 spoke with the voice of someone who had observed the rise and fall of civilizations across temporal dimensions. What happens if we deploy the full battle fleet and humans adapt to counter it as they have adapted to counter everything else we have deployed against them? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If humanity could adapt to counter the Council's ultimate military response, it would mean the end of Council authority throughout the galaxy. Other species would see that the Council's power could be challenged successfully, and the careful balance that had maintained galactic peace for millennia would collapse. There is another consideration, High Counselor Eternal Wisdom 7 continued reluctantly. Human expansion has not slowed during the conflict. They continue to establish new colonies and explore new territories. Furthermore, they appear to be making contact with several non-Council species in the Outer Rim territories. Ambassador Zephyr 97 felt her cybernetic enhancements spike with alarm. Are they forming alliances? Unknown but possible. We have detected human vessels and systems inhabited by the Ganthari tribes, the Independent Stellar Confederacy, and several other non-aligned species. The nature of these contacts is unclear, but the timing suggests deliberate outreach rather than coincidental exploration. The full scope of the disaster was becoming clear. Not only had humanity refused to be conquered, but they were potentially spreading their dangerous ideas about independence and improvisation to other species that had remained outside Council authority. If human concepts of warfare and civilization began spreading throughout the galaxy, the Council's entire system of order could be threatened. Recommendations? Asked General Prime Nexus Alpha. High Counselor Eternal Wisdom. 7 was quiet for a moment, accessing databases and analysis systems that had been developed over thousands of years of successful galactic governance. Every model she consulted provided the same disturbing conclusion. Traditional Council methods were insufficient to deal with the human threat. We have 3 options, she finally said. First, we can deploy the full battle fleet with authorization to use any level of force necessary to achieve human surrender or elimination. This approach carries the risk of massive casualties and potential failure if humans adapt to counter our ultimate weapons. Second option, we can attempt to negotiate a settlement that acknowledges human independence in exchange for territorial restrictions and non-interference agreements. This would represent the first time in Council history that we have been forced to negotiate with a species rather than simply dictating terms. And the third option? Asked Sage 7-9. We can withdraw from human space entirely and establish a containment perimeter around their territory, hoping that their expansion will be slow enough to give us time to develop new methods for dealing with them. The chamber fell silent as the representatives considered options that all represented varying degrees of Council defeat. For 2,000 years they had been the unquestioned authority in galactic affairs. Now they were being forced to choose between a potentially disastrous military escalation, humiliating diplomatic concessions, or strategic withdrawal in the face of a species they had initially dismissed as primitive. Ambassador Zephyr 97 spoke first. What does Fleet Commander Axiom 7 Alpha recommend? Complete military conquest using any means necessary, the High Counselor replied. She believes that human adaptability makes negotiation futile and containment temporary. In her assessment, humanity represents an existential threat to Council authority that must be eliminated before their capabilities improve further. And your assessment, High Counselor? High Counselor. Eternal Wisdom 7 had been hoping to avoid answering that question directly, but the chamber was waiting for her professional judgment. Based on 18 months of observation, I believe humans represent something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that becomes more dangerous when faced with superior opposition. Traditional military doctrine assumes that overwhelming force will eventually break enemy resistance, but human resistance appears to strengthen in response to casualties and defeats. You are suggesting they cannot be conquered by conventional means? I am suggesting that they may have discovered something that makes conventional conquest impossible, the ability to adapt faster than their enemies can exploit advantages. If that assessment is correct, then military escalation will only result in accelerated human development and potentially catastrophic casualties for Council forces. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than any in Council history. 24 representatives voted for immediate deployment of the full battle fleet, 22 voted for attempting diplomatic solution, 1 abstained. High Counselor Eternal Wisdom 7 cast the deciding vote for military escalation, but her decision was based on cold calculation rather than confidence. If humanity could adapt to counter the Council's ultimate weapons, the war would be lost regardless. If they could not, humanity would be destroyed before they could develop the capability. Either way, the age of easy Council dominance was ending. As the session concluded and representatives began planning for what would either be the final campaign against human resistance or the beginning of a new and dangerous era in galactic politics, a message arrived from the Outer Rim territories that would change everything. The human vessel UES Indomitable had just arrived in the Ganthari home system carrying representatives from 17 different human colonies and a proposal that would reshape the galaxy forever. A military alliance between humanity and every non-Council species in known space, united by the shared goal of ending Council hegemony and establishing true galactic democracy. The message concluded with a statement that would be remembered throughout galactic history. The Council claims to represent the civilized galaxy, but they only represent the conquered galaxy. We offer an alternative: freedom, cooperation, and the right of every species to determine its own destiny among the stars. The war that had begun as a simple police action against unruly primitives was about to become a galactic revolution, with humanity leading a coalition of species who had decided they preferred chaos to chains. High Counselor Eternal Wisdom, Seven read the intelligence report and realized that regardless of the outcome of the military escalation, the galaxy would never be the same again. Humanity had done more than resist conquest. They had introduced ideas that would spread far beyond their own species. The Council's perfect order was about to be challenged by something far more dangerous than human weapons or human tactics. Human ideas about what freedom meant among the peace.